So making ourselves comfortable. And establishing some stillness in the body. And noticing sensations being experienced through the senses. Sound, touch, taste, smell. Sight, whether that be external or internal. There may be thoughts, or the mind may be still and empty. But let's shift our awareness to the one ground of being, the sense of alive consciousness that is the streaming background, foreground, and substance to all experience. That one field, the divine field, permeating all things and beyond object or subject, expanding infinitely. And as we rest in this peaceful, aware presence, there may be sensations or thoughts passing through. Let there be no resistance. All is welcome here. And just as the birds fly across the sky, through the trees, our focus is on that sky, not on the thought birds that are flying by. But the fabric itself of this infinite, peaceful presence. knowing that this field of peaceful presence is ever available, unchanging. There is no gate to go through to get there. It is simply a tuning in. And then beginning to localize our awareness again from infinite, boundless consciousness to the localized, objective consciousness of this body. And again, noticing the sensations that are experienced through the senses of this magnificent body, feeling the touch of the body in the chair, perhaps the hands in the lap, feeling the movement of the breath in the body, and the organs shifting and moving around the expanding and contracting lungs. Notice any other sensations which the mind may judge as pleasant or unpleasant. Perhaps there's a smell at the nostrils or sounds in the building. Just simply acknowledging the grounded, localized awareness of body experienced through the senses. And take a deep breath in and out. And notice that our sense of physical presence is experienced through these senses, these 5 senses. Sense of touch and feeling the body pressing into the chair, feeling the hands in the lap and the feet on the floor or the stool or cushion, the eyelids against each other, and the sense of smell, the sense of sound. And as we notice the sounds around us, the mind expands out, automatically doing its job of naming those sounds. Perhaps there's a bird outside the window. Perhaps there's a movement of someone else in the building. Perhaps the pipes are gurgling, or there's rain on the roof. And all these sounds are being identified through that sensorial input, through the main computer of the brain. And then the patterns of our history immediately name those and seek instantly out for recognition or recognition of an experience, a sound, a taste, a smell that's been experienced by this body and its patterns in the past. and those memories are kept in the computer to instantly be referred to give some sense of a physical being in a physical space experienced through the senses. The field of peaceful presence, the field of awareness, that expanded, infinite field of consciousness is experienced through all of this. It is the essential ground of being that flows through and is all of this. And that divine radio, that field of peaceful presence, of expanded consciousness, can always be tuned into. It is the patterns of the history, and that those patterns that create this separate identity, which is fed through the senses and is plugged into universal mind, that is, as we experience, the separate self. Yet it is not really separate, because if we understand we are not limited to this body, then we are not imprisoned in that separate self. We enjoy the body, we enjoy the senses and all this wonderful body has to offer. We enjoy the whole dance. But we are also free to tune in to the divine radio. We are given a brain which is associated with mind. It is the computer of mind. And the mind also is a wonderful gift, just like the body. It allows us to express through creation, whether that is through writing, whether that is through music, whether that is through landscaping or gardening or horse riding, it doesn't matter. This mind is a great gift for us to express uniquely in this God-given life. What most people are seeking is freedom from suffering. And here we remind ourselves that we can live a full and wonderful and joyful life, fully experiencing all life has to offer, and free of suffering if we remember that we are not this body, that ultimately there is one of us here expressing as multiplicity and diversity. And as we let go of the craving mind, the mind that attaches itself to an identity, to a story, to our history. We can release those cravings, the aversion, the pushing away, the judgment, whether that be a judgment toward ourselves or others. And remember that this is a divine dance, that peace is ever available, always here, if we choose to adjust the radio dial and tune in. Of course, none of this means that life will be easy. We will be challenged when we wake up and we have this understanding. And those challenges are there simply for us to see through the patterns and release our identification with the patterned self. So, I open to you guys now and welcome any questions, any sharings, any pointings that you've had. Perhaps you've had an aha moment, or something's become clearer for you since we've seen each other. Whatever you share will be perfect for everyone here, because this satsang is not guided by us individually. It is what happens in this moment, in the unfolding, leading edge of creation, which is always now. So feel free to just unmute yourself and go ahead.
I wonder if you could say something about you've talked about addictions before, and I went away for a few days with a friend, and I hadn't quite realised just how problematic drinking is, and it was really it was extraordinary watching somebody do that to themselves, and then and so deeply sad to see somebody needing that to numb, to dissociate so much from what's going on. And I suppose, yeah, it was just quite yeah, it was just really sad to see that. And I'd like to get your thoughts on, or your wisdom on addictions.
It is hard to see someone, particularly someone that you care about or that you love, struggling with addiction. But what the word that you said then, which is very appropriate, Sarah, is that they're disassociating, they're using it to create distance between the perceived reality and what they're identified with as themselves. Ultimately, there has to be a spark of awareness, a little spark that can then, like lighting a fire in the forest, you know, there's got to be a spark first. Then you can feed that spark, and that will then grow into a little flame, and slowly. But that little spark has to be there first. And that little spark is, I have suffered enough. I am ready for something else. And it seems, sadly, that unless someone reaches that point, they're very unlikely to change that addictive behavior. And you know, that spark might end up being, all it needs to be is a spark, and that spark of awareness is, I have a problem. I need help, or I'm not dealing with this myself. And without that desire for change, what we can do really there is simply hold space for that person, hold spacious awareness, tune into the divine radio, just as we were doing. Judgment is never going to help. And although something may seem sad, there is a reason for that. And we are all in a state of suffering until we are in freedom. Whether that suffering is looking like addiction, or someone's running away in a slightly different way. Although mostly it's addiction, and sometimes that addiction can be a shopping addiction or a traveling addiction or a talking addiction. We often meet people who just continue to chatter, not leaving any space, because if they have space, then a thought might come in, and that may be overwhelming for them. Basically, we are all addicts until we are not. And that addiction can be so many, can show up in so many different ways. However, substance addiction will then start to deteriorate the body, the liver, etc., the digestive system. And sometimes that repair can be, that damage can be irreparable. Holding space for that person. And the other thing is perhaps not joining them in the drink. Because most alcoholics, particularly, they want you to join them in that. Or even with drugs, they want you to join them in that. And simply by not, and by holding a different space, sometimes that can be enough so that the awareness shines back on themselves, because we need that spark of awareness to change. I'll just unmute you again, Sarah.
That's that's really helpful. I was very, I knew that it wasn't helpful to start talking about her drinking, because it's how she copes. So it wouldn't be helpful in a way to take, you know, to sort of tackle that. It's about, why is she not coping? You know, there's something behind it, but it's really helpful to hear talk about the spark needs to be there to reach the point that she or anybody in that situation has suffered enough. And that's really helpful, because I felt that all I was able to do was hold space, and so yeah.
But there's always suffering underneath any form of addiction. There's always some form of suffering. And that is something we can talk about. You know, we can bring that up. You know, do you need some more support in any way, depending on what that situation is? But there will be no change unless there's awareness there that, and a desire that I have suffered enough now. I really need to look for some better answers to my deep questioning. If there's ever an opening for a philosophic conversation, that can be helpful, but not when someone's drunk or under the influence of drugs, unfortunately, because you're wasting breath talking to someone who's, you know, not in right mind at that stage. Thanks, Sarah. It is. I know it's hard. I discovered my first husband who, it was a shock to discover that he was a cupboard alcoholic, secret alcoholic, and I was so busy with our young children that I did not, and alcohol I didn't drink at all. And to discover that, because he didn't drink, I thought as well, but it was always hidden somewhere in a shed or down the paddock or whatever. So tricky, very tricky. And unless that person really wants to change and is willing to, stream awareness into that. Unfortunately, he wasn't, and he drank himself to death. And that's sad on one level, but that's the result of that action. Okay.
I was just going to say just what my experience at the moment is, which is it's of more opening, and just finding that actually during this time, these are the opportunities that are being offered to me, to either open or to close and retreat. So it's very interesting to accompany myself and with awareness in how things are unfolding. And I suppose there is more time and more space now to do that on a more than a daily basis, but just all the time, just being aware, seeing what arises, seeing the effect on my body, seeing how to open to that rather than to close and move in a different direction. So I just wanted to say that's happening at the moment, and I'm just noticing it and accompanying it, and just noticing this movement is and it happens it happens so fast. the response, the reaction, it's so fast to move in one direction or to ease into it. So that's what's happening for me at the moment.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So you see, this is when the spark turns into a fire. And that fire is fed by the openness of your spirit to be free, which is really beautiful. And it's interesting, something you shared there, Colette, that there's more time now. And in a sense, this year has offered this to many people. But in another sense, the time has always been the same. I think it's when the fruit is ripe. When we are ripe, then there is all the time in the world. And that's not our timing, that's divine timing. That's very beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for the lovely picture of your babies. They're so sweet.
I think, I think it was very helpful. I think though, and the though is important, you used the word wrestling last week. You just said we wrestle or something, and I'm just aware that my mind is a wrestler. That is my experience, that I've spent my life around ideas. Being passionate about ideas and exploring ideas for good or for bad. And, the notion of the finite mind versus the infinite mind, and tuning into the infinite mind. My mind wrestles with that because what it says is, well, I can tune in, I can see it, I can hear it, but that ain't enough. When I look at, you talked today about, the mind is capable of creative things like, I listened on the TV last night to a 22-year-old saxophonist girl who's just got to the finals of the BBC Music something or other. And her capability at the age of 22 years is so incredible. There's a part of me that says, okay, I can tune into that. I can appreciate that that is a capability. But there's no way I can have that capability in this lifetime. I mean, it's just on a different level. So for me, there's something about recognizing the difference in human potential and creativity, but yet being able to tune into it, but yet not being able to have it, if that makes any sense, or not being able to have it in this lifetime.
I just have to try and clarify something you said then, just to understand completely what you're saying. So we talk about the one mind, the cosmic mind, the mind of God. There's so many different words for it. And then we have the individual with the brain, which is like our computer, which deciphers mind. And I find that I have noticed that most great scientists or great composers or people who have left an extraordinary mark, and perhaps this girl that you're speaking about now, this saxophonist, are people who often spend a lot of time in that reverie state. But because that's their gift, whether that's music, whether that's science, whether that's, some form of engineering, it could be design, it could be anything, because that they're the gifts that have been patterned in that package. When they tune in to divine mind or the profound mind, then that's going to be filtered through the gifts that are there, and thus it may come out as music. Like Terry always says when he writes a new song, I don't know where that came from. And I'm like that when I write poetry, or I've written a few songs myself and I don't know where they came from. I didn't sit down and go, I've got to write a song now, or I've got to write a poem, and gosh, how should that go? It just comes out. It's just like speaking for me. When I'm speaking on these subjects, I never plan what I'm going to say at satsang, or there's no study about that goes on. It's just whatever comes in the moment. However, with the learned mind, when we are having to learn a lot of knowledge through study, through books, through memory, etc., that's a very, very different form or way to use the individual mind. And sometimes that intellectual learning and those patterns can be so strong that I feel that sometimes they can block the connection to that higher mind, because they're very well constructed. They're like blocks, particularly scholars who are learned in a particular area. However, there are also scholars who are learned in a particular area, but they can still tune in to the ground of being and download profound wisdom with that as well. So I think there's three different approaches there. There's someone who is it goes into that state very easily. They've got the gift of music and a desire and a love for that, and that's what filters through. There's someone who's a very learned scholar, but those blocks are so tight with that learning that there's no room for the higher consciousness to flow through. They don't go into the reverie state. They're switched on to the intellectual all the time. Or there's the very highly trained intellectual, but someone who also goes into open-minded spaces as well, and that filters through and marries beautifully. So there's not one way, and I think it's open to everyone. It's open to everyone. It just depends on what patterns are there as to how that filters through or not. Or if those blocks are too, those blocks of knowledge are so closely, lined up that there's no way for that anything to filter through.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes absolute sense, that obviously, that a way of seeing can get in the way of not seeing. And I mean, I'm aware, I think I am aware certainly of the which the ways I've learnt to think and write can act as a block. So that occasionally, as you also explained, one can download something comes despite that, which is at a higher level. So it's about how does one get the balance between the practice, which is required in order to be able to be in a position to download something from somewhere broader, and yet the practice not getting in the way of that. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. That makes a lot of sense. Something I think that really helps is to live with what we call beginner's mind, and to, rather than to know, to say, I don't know. To sometimes say, I don't know, show me, I'm open here. But there's something in the separate self-identification, or the ego, that wants to know. It's mine. I know. I've got the answer. I know how to, whatever it is. And that is one of the real limitations of living with total identification with that separate self, or that ego self, or there's so many ways we can speak about that. So for me, I came to a point where I just threw my hands in the air, and it was in a state of grief after my son had died. And I went, I just don't know anymore. I know nothing. I felt like all the knowledge I had gained and all the teaching I had done, I just felt completely empty of knowing. At the time, I felt like I was a complete failure. It was absolute bottom of the heap. I don't know. And from that, they developed a beginner's mind. Show me. Let me just be in nature. Let me just be free of knowing. Don't ask me, I don't know. And again, I have no idea how that happened, that suddenly greater knowing occurred. But I know that I had to reach a point where I felt as if I was empty and I was asking to be filled up again. That was just the experience here. I'm not saying do that because that's a method or anything like that, but that was the experience here. Because in the past, I had quite a strong mind as well. There's a mind here that liked to know as well, and with all the training that I had experienced, which is still all useful and it's still all there, but it just comes up when it's needed now. It doesn't rule the roost, so to speak. It's all valuable. But I find when I'm most clear, it is when, for instance, for satsang, walk in here, I sit down, there's no history, there's no plan, there's no ideas of what we're going to talk about or where we're going to go. I just sit. And after we say hello, we go into that beautiful state of peaceful presence, and then something happens. And that trust that something will happen, something will come out of the mouth. And I just need to get out of the way for that to happen. It's interesting. It's a whole new way, but it's wonderful and it's effortless. It's actually more effortless than all the planning and the needing to know and doubting whether, the right words will come out the right way, and all that stuff when the ego is involved that comes up, oh, will I say the right thing? Will I say the wrong thing? Maybe I won't be this or that, or all that identification just falls away when we just go, I don't know, let me open to the moment, and whatever flows, trust that that's perfect. It's a whole different way of approaching. And of course, we can't do that all the time, because there are some times where, for instance, with Ish tonight, he'll be in his kitchen and his plumbing knowledge will come to the forefront of his mind to fix that leak. And that's great. That knowledge, hopefully he's got some plumbing knowledge, will be there, or he'll call a plumber who knows how to deal with that issue. So, that's when the learned experience is incredibly useful and helpful, isn't it?
Mm. Thank you. That's yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'm sure Terry will have something to share about that too. And I'm going to pass over to you now, Terry.
Yes. Well, knowledge is necessary. Absolutely, it's when it starts developing its own personality that it becomes a problem. I talked about that scene in 2001 where Hal the computer doesn't want to let the astronaut back in. Because there seem to be two streams, and the background process of thinking is constantly referring back to the memory banks of past experience and projecting this onto the present. And it creates an illusory sense of there being a past and future, which we call time. And time is necessary in the sense of this is a holographic universe. Nothing is real, but it's as real as anything is. And there's another stream which we call awareness, which carries the universe of form. But in that stream, creation and destruction happens at the same time. So you cannot understand that with the rational mind, because the mind uses memory and it solely functions in time, whereas awareness is not only containing everything, it is everything. It's not something separate from everything. It's not the thing that contains the universe, it is the universe. The awareness and the universe are the same thing. And so the process of thought is like a video camera scanning ahead for danger all the time. And when we're living in fear and struggle, this camera is set to high alert. I think the Americans came up with these different levels. There's DEFCON 1, DEFCON 2, DEFCON 3. I think it means defense condition 1, defense condition 2. You know, the alert is raised to a higher level depending on the level of stress experienced and the level of threat perceived. So if we're running on DEFCON 2 or 3, we are overreactive, we're resisting presence, we're unable to accept things as they are, and therefore we build up layers of incomplete experience, and these get locked into our body muscles, whatever. And then there's this whole process of this stream carries on, but it sort of goes glitch, and because we're not, until we accept things as they are, they'll keep coming back. That's what they call karma. And so we build up these layers of incomplete experience, and this creates the patterns that start to run us, that create the suffering with which we struggle. I have a expression where I think there's an extra day in the week. It's called blah day. And that blah day can take the place of any day in the week. You can have Monday, Tuesday, blah day, Thursday, or you can have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, blah day, Friday, whatever. But blah day used to be a real problem for me because it looked like everything was really, really wrong. And what a blessing when you don't see things wrong anymore. There's no way you can ever stop the stream of thinking. It's impossible. But that thinking can still go on in the background. And that's running in the background. It's the camera just steady scanning for danger, for problems, lying ahead. It does it by itself. That's the whole process of thinking. It's there to recognize danger or set a direction. You're heading up to Scotland, you need the map. Or you need to dial the number on the phone. It doesn't speak. It dials the number. So there's that wonderful line from Shakespeare, I mentioned it last week. It's, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And that's what happens on blah days now. The thinking doesn't come into it, and therefore the blah day is just it is so day. Nothing particular exciting happening, nothing particularly awful happening, just a blah day. You could call it an in-breath, universal in-breath, where things just look as though they're just ticking over. Boredom doesn't set in because I'm not expecting anything else to come into the picture. So
I think the important reminder that Terry mentioned then is that we never forget that awareness, or the ground of being, or divine consciousness, these are all different words that we can call it, is the one thing expressing as multiplicity and diversity through duality and down to this earthly experience that we have the great gift and privilege to be experiencing now. But that awareness is the one thing, and the experience here now is when there is an attunement to awareness itself. The mind is naturally still. pond is naturally still, and the ripples get less and less, and then they're still. And in that stillness and inner silence, there is a deep sense of peace and a knowing that everything is okay, exactly as it is. And it doesn't need the separate input of Soraya. Yet, the expression that comes through here is perfect also, as it is with each and everyone. And knowing that there's no way to make that happen, that stillness and quietness, that attuning to awareness itself, or the ground of being, that will happen when it happens. But it does help to constantly be shining the light of awareness on patterns as they arise here. You know, spotlighting those. There may be no action needed around that, just to be aware. There's that pattern again. I know I'm not that. And there's no need to act on that, but there it is. Or, oh, I just responded to that old pattern. There's still a trace of that there. That's okay. It'll melt when it's ready to melt. So, until next week, so much love to everybody. Have a beautiful week. Enjoy, enjoy, enjoy. And when you're not enjoying, know that you're not enjoying. Namaste.